Good.
Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fialka. It's September 22, 2021. It's an honor and a pleasure to share time here on Rob Grant's amazing channel. I'm probably wrong about everything. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
You're going to plug your subscribe little advertising.
Yes, yeah. For those tuning in, if you like this show, please subscribe to our YouTube and like and all that fun stuff, and help us grow our community. And then I'll write that little blurb. Otherwise, you're good to go, Jerry.
All right. Thank you so much. This is Laughtears number 8. We're here welcoming Duncan Echelson. Say your name, Duncan, so I get it right.
Echelson.
Echelson. Thank you, Duncan.
Just turn the H into a K and you're fine.
All right. And we're here with Roy Benjamin. Is that correct, Roy?
That's correct. Hello.
Okay. So the name of this session is from a James Joyce line in Finnegan's Wake. He said, "First we feel, then we fall." Duncan, we'll start with you. What in the heck do you think that evokes for you?
I think he's kind of being serious and comical all at the same time. He's making fun of the idea that we could be human without falling.
Good. Roy, what's your take on that line?
Well, it seems like it's kind of a reversal of some of his other things where he says rise after fall, or at the end of the wake he says, I think I die down and only to wash up. So usually he has the upward direction after the downward direction, which is more in line. You mentioned the Divine Comedy, the spirit goes up, but it's the opposite with and I think that's ALP speaking, right? First we feel, then we fall at the end.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the number 1132 comes up in the wake a lot, and 11 is the symbol for rising, and 32 is the symbol for falling.
Oh, okay.
So I'm curious, when Carl Jung told Richard Ellman, who is one of the great Joyce scholars, I'm lucky because he was born in Michigan on my birthday, the Ides of March 15th. Jung told Ellman that Lucia and Joyce were like two people going to the bottom of a river, one falling and the other diving. So, Roy, we'll start with you. What do you think Ellman was saying there with the involvement of Lucia and James Joyce?
Yeah, well, I think Jung had this idea of the anima and the animus, that the female side of the man and the male side of the woman, and that Joyce and his daughter were entangled in this kind of incestuous, I don't think literally incestuous, but psychically incestuous tangle that she could not emerge from, and it eventually led to her losing her sanity, and whereas he could go down to the depths and come up again, with impunity. He was a diver.
Yeah. Duncan, what's your take on that? One falling and the other diving. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah,
we can hear you now.
Diving, you prepare to dive. Okay. That maybe you've fallen in the past, and then you go, oh, well, that was interesting. Like if you go back to Portrait of the Artist, he had some real struggles there when the church and the priest were bedeviling him. And, so he had some falling experiences. But then he observed them and he analyzed them and he learned how to work with it. And then he decided, hey, I'm going to do this on purpose.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you develop a skill at something, you can do it with relative impunity. Whereas the implication is that Lucia didn't really master those skills, and so she would just find herself careening out of control. Um, so that's the difference. It's not what you do; it's your relationship to it.
Mhm.
Great word, relationship. That's what we're all about, because it seems as though from the great poet Auden, who said that the mystery of art is that we don't know if it activates or pacifies us. And I think that's an interesting conundrum, because it sort of evokes Brecht, the playwright, also saying, I don't want art that pacifies me or puts me in a trance. I want art that activates me, and gets me going. Now, that's a high aspiration, because we do want art to maybe do something for us. We might want to turn to art to entertain us, educate us, but art that puts you in a trance has its services. If you ever been to a Grateful Dead concert, or you just zone out watching a movie or zone out into music, it can have amazing healing properties. And I don't want to discount it, but I think that Joyce might have needed watching his daughter dance around in the living room to inspire Finnegan's Wake. So, I think that's what he did, was he um, let it wash over him as an influence.
Hmm.
Go
Robert
ahead.
is.
What
Mhm.
in the does art pacify or does it activate? Well, if all you ever did was watching art that activated you, at some point it would almost become like the Baroque bass line. Like, this is just what I do. Like, it's not activating anything. It's like Michael Bay films. Not to trash the guy or anything, but these Transformer movies, everything's blowing up. After about like 35 minutes, you're like, okay, like, wow, I've seen this all. So sometimes being overstimulated, that just becomes your baseline, and then it's like, wow, this isn't really doing anything for me.
That's a good point, because that's called dynamics. And, Joseph Campbell learned everything he knows from Finnegan's Wake. And he basically said there's like 8 types of storytelling, or 8 elements in storytelling. And one of them is dynamics. So, you don't want a sledgehammer. We call that sledgehammer filmmaking. You don't want to hit them over the head. But I mean, in
Unless
essence,
you're 18,
in,
male.
in, in essence, that's what Finnegan's Wake is. It never lets up. Is there dynamic shifts in Finnegan's Wake, Roy?
Well, I just want to add one thing about dynamics and pacification. That I was thinking of Aristotle's idea of tragedy, which is that it excites the emotions of terror or fear and pity, but then it purges them so that there's a state of kind of passivity after the passions are purged. And uh,
Well, who's accomplished that for you? Does Joyce accomplish that?
I don't know. I was trying to. There was a passage in Elman, I forget where it is, where it said that Joyce kept needing. He was like performing some kind of exorcism on himself, and he needed to keep upping the ante to exorcise these almost evil spirits that were tormenting him. And part of it had to do with his torment over Lucia, I'm sure, but also being in exile. Being separated from the country he loved, that was a constant torment to him.
Yeah, Duncan, I'd love you to weigh in, especially with our discussion in the Dante group today about, do you forget, on how humans deal with their sins?
Once again, it depends upon how you're raised and what your equipment is. I mean, as I mentioned before, in Portrait of the Artist, it's obvious. Taking Portrait Artist as coming out of Joyce's experience in the Catholic school and under the Catholic priest and the heavy duty propaganda he went through. He had to deal with a lot of stuff there. And once again, he realized at a certain point that, oh, yeah, this stuff is tormenting me, but it's also grist for the mill. And so he started, instead of letting it just torment him, he started observing it more carefully in himself and in other people. And then he began to realize, in my humble opinion, he began to realize that he was kind of the slave to the king and the pope. That was the Irish Catholic situation. And he had already studied revolutionary thinkers. Even St. Thomas Aquinas was kind of a revolutionary thinker. And then he got into Vico, and he got into, the Ulysses, and he got into Bruno. And then he started heavy-duty studies. He went and read, God knows, how many hours he spent and how many tomes he spent reading back through the centuries and going to court cases and reading government edicts, current and past edicts. And he began to understand the hypnotic effect, if you will, of words and rhetoric. And I think from that point on, in some sense, he dedicated his life to showing how words and rhetoric use to capture people's minds, form people's minds, and ironically, could also be used to release people, to free them.
Duncan, that was brilliant because it really evoked McLuhan's line, words are the most universal and addicting drug. And, I don't think he's putting drug in the sense of a negative thing. It's a tool. And I think both you guys really evoked something there that I'd love to explore is when Joyce said, I'm applied Aquinas. Roy, what did Joyce, Duncan went into these big heavy hitters like Bruno and Vico. What did he mean by applied Aquinas, Roy?
Well, I think one of the reasons he liked one thing he responded to in Aquinas is there's a kind of anti-Platonism where I think he did have an impulse to kind of aspire to a realm of pure spirit, or he was brainwashed to think that the body was evil, certainly by the Catholic Church and the sexual feelings of the body, whereas Aquinas believed very firmly in the body and the soul are connected. And he kind of makes fun of that when he talks about Aquinas' ton belly. Supposedly Aquinas was very overweight, that they had to cut out a portion of the table he ate at. But kind of like that. But it also, I think it also represented for him that there was a kind of a connection between mind and body in Aquinas that you couldn't be separated. I think that's one of the things he responded to in Aquinas.
Well, Duncan, what do you think applied Aquinas meant when Joyce said it?
My understanding, and I know almost nothing about Aquinas other than what I've learned through Joyce, is that Aquinas was very rigorous, and he was a good student of logic, and he was an excellent student of rhetoric. And Joyce, for whatever reason, I'm not clear at that time, decided that Aquinas was like a rope to get himself out of this mental, spiritual morass that he was in. But Joyce being Joyce, he did something a little different than Aquinas was developed these tools for. And being a more modern person, in my opinion, and exposed to more influences, Joyce applied logic and the study of rhetoric to the world around him, which was becoming a very cosmopolitan world, and realized that Aquinas, for all of his brilliance, was using the logic and the words in a very narrow sense.
Yeah.
So just like Vico, I mean, Joyce was an ultimate grave robber. You know, he would steal from everybody, and he was perverse. And I'm not using perverse in a negative way here.
Yeah.
Like when Joyce would read Aquinas or Vico or Bruno or Dante or Shakespeare, he was not reverential. He was there to steal.
Yeah.
And he was there to change.
And make fun of. Yeah.
And to make fun of. And frankly, that's why I read Joyce.
Yeah.
I'm here to steal. Fun of. I mean, he's a pretty weird cat, if you get down to it. But he's a rich mound. That image of the litter heap is brilliant.
Yeah.
And Joyce, I think that's the key that Joyce is giving to us. He's a writer who just goes to the litter heap and he takes something out and he looks at it. He goes, "Oh, that's pretty freaking interesting. I wonder how I can use that." And he might not apply it for years. He might not apply it for decades. But he's not there to be reverential. He's there to
You know what? It reminds me, Duncan, so much of what Bob Dobbs says about Frank Zappa. He said he reverently satirized what he loved the most. So he reverently satirized black music, you know. So he appears on Joe's Garage, blackface. He sings a song called Nigger Business. I mean, this shit would not be
allowed now. He'd be canceled in a second.
Thank God he was in a time where they allowed it a little, but still people don't always get it. They think, you know, the LA Times wrote an article and said he was, you know, making fun of black music with this black guy singing. He said that he was running him through Jungle Boogie routines. So the next day, Frank got on stage and sang Jungle Boogie with his black singer. But let's start with you, Roy. How has Finnegan's Wake shaped your behavior?
Well, I think it's made me more sensitive to puns. And, unfortunately, it has exacerbated my non-lateral thinking, you know, associative thinking. So, in some ways, it may.
Explain that last statement. I like that one.
Well, you know, so lateral thinking associatively rather than straight ahead or deductively. Everything reminds you of something else. It's hard, in a way, it's hard to get anywhere, but then there's nowhere to go. So
it's the Edward de Bono.
So
what was that?
Edward de Bono.
Yes, lateral thinking.
Yeah.
I've talked to Jerry before about Edward.
That's good. Definitely suss that out, Duncan. But I just want to fit for Roy is, you're saying that simultaneity is the human condition, but we're forced to believe that through societal norms that it isn't, that you're supposed to live linear.
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't. I don't know if I mean, I think that there are two. There probably there's more than one way of thinking, and I think some people tend toward one type of thinking. As there are very logical, no nonsense people, and some people who are more attracted to metaphor and resemblance, and I just think of those as two poles of the human brain, you know.
Right.
And I'm sure certainly a society can use those, especially you know, to control people and brainwash people. But you know.
Right, but you've been a teacher most of your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And which one do you employ as a teacher?
Well, you know, I'd like to get a balance. Like, you know, I like my students to focus on a concept that they can define, which is in some ways it's very cut and dried. But then you use that to get into things that are messier and you know that cause you to qualify whatever statements you make about something.
Right. So, Duncan, explain to me again what Edward was teaching us.
Well, Edward de Bono was basically just saying, instead of being so goal oriented, it's beneficial to brainstorm. And it's even more beneficial to brainstorm with a group of people where judgments are suspended.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then he, through his books, he wrote a bunch of books. He presented all kinds of techniques for doing this. But the essence was, you know, just let your mind float around the problem.
Mm.
You know, which interestingly enough is a very Japanese way of doing things. When a group of Japanese businessmen get together, this is traditional. My information may be out of date, but I don't think so. I used to be a facilitator for cross-cultural communication with Japanese, and the first thing that we taught them was we would set up these situations where they would have to arrive at a decision, and then we would take notes, and then we would show how, roughly speaking, a Western businessman wants to bring in a few facts and make a decision. Time is money. We got to get this done. Japanese team kind of wants to go in and they want to circle the problem and they want to bring in what to a Westerner is all kinds of extraneous stuff. And then they want to slowly arrive at some sort of consensus.
Yeah.
The Westerner will just say, well, the boss made this decision. This is what we're going to do.
Right.
Mm.
Go
Right,
ahead, Bob.
Well, I was just thinking, if you only lived in your culture, you would think in the way that the culture does. But if you transplant yourself, like you go to Japan or a place that, just for example, Duncan's using Japan, that it's a very different culture, a very different way of solving problems, et cetera, et cetera. You start to see that, oh, there's not just one way of doing things. I'm reading this book right now called Captive Paradise, and it's about how Hawaii became the 50th state, on how before, how the indigenous people living there, how they did things. And then when the missionaries came there, they were like, holy Christ, literally, we got to figure out a better way to like educate these people. And just the way that they had to, it was like they literally came to a place that had a completely different perspective of existence. And I think that it's hard for, you know, someone like myself who all of my life I've lived things a certain way, and then to transplant myself, it would be like, this is a completely different way of thinking. And it's hard not to say that, well, my way's better. It's not better or worse, it's just different. And maybe there's something there in terms of what is the best way of learning or knowing? And it sounds like from what you guys are telling me, James Joyce, I'm not super familiar with Finnegan's Wake, but he's challenging the way that we see all things.
Yes.
Mhm.
So how do we know that anything's right?
Yeah, he's creating.
Yeah.
He's writing language about language so that he helps us understand what reading does. It's like no one's done Zooms that are about Zooms, basically.
Right.
We just get into the Zoom box and it's a comfortable space. And again, Rob, we thank you for facilitating. This is a nice little foursome. And I wanted to ask you led perfectly into the question to Duncan, is how has Finnegan's Wake shaped your behavior, Duncan?
Well, I you know, it's led to all kinds of marvelous things, and other literature. I mean, when I first got into it, I was naively looking for the story thread, and then I was looking for a multiple story thread. You know, and you can find lots of books on all this stuff. And I was looking for, you know, kind of the fact book, kind of the McHugh approach, where you go ahead and you find out all the little facts, and then you're going to get the real story. You're going to break the code. And that was all useful stuff for me. But more and more I began to realize, and I don't know if this is what Joyce intended at all, but he's presenting us with a whole world of facts and tools, and he's saying, "Go have fun."
It's a Lego set.
You know,
Lego set.
it's a you know, a big set of, you know, fun toys with an important purpose, and the important purpose is. As Rob alluded to, if you're raised in a particular culture with a particular language, you're going to think that if you don't know the truth, you're on your way to knowing the truth. And when you're exposed to a number of different cultures and a number of different languages, a more humble approach comes in, and then you know, hopefully get to the stage where you go, wow, this is really interesting. I haven't left the sandbox at all. I just got a bigger sandbox.
Dude, that's Orson Welles, Duncan. He said that a movie set is like a sandbox, like a play train set for a kid, you know. And this is what McLuhan said too. His main thing was it's a playground. We're in a playground, but it is serious. You know, like you said, it's serious. I wanted to bring up, you know, one of our new members in the Finnegan's Wake Reading Club is Alexis. You know, and her teacher Julie is a great literature professor, and Alexis is like a stellar student, and she just jumped right into the wake like she knew what it was all about. So I was talking to her the other day and I says, how has Finnegan's Wake shaped your behavior? She said, it made my life a living hell. And I was like, I was shocked in a way. But then she said, well, really, what it did was rewire how I looked at literature. Which funny thing, because she used the metaphor for the eye, and that's what we think of when we look at a book, and we think it's an eye experience. When Joyce was insisting, and it was today I heard Robert Anton Wilson say that Tyndall was the one who insisted that you read Finnegan's Wake out loud, and I think it was Joyce who insisted. But I always say Joyce insisted that you read it out loud with a group of people. So I'll just go with that until somebody disproves me.
Yeah, based on Jerry's intuition.
Based on my intuition. for years I said James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin. That's a fact. And he checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" And one guy challenged me, P. Adam Sidney. I think it was P. Adam Sidney. He says, "Joyce never said that." So all I have to do is say, allegedly said that, because all I did was hear it from somebody else, you know, who are in the Joyce world, and then they have to claim their source. So, you know, I'm great at using my intuition or spreading disinformation.
He's one of the washerwomen talking about HDE, spreading rumors.
Yeah, so I wanted to, you know, here we got Rob, who we're desperately trying to get him to get knee deep in the swamp muck of the wake. And Roy, I wanted you to respond to this Gertrude Stein quote. And, you know, how would you convince someone who knows what literature is? It's a linear thing, and they're open to literature. I mean, Rob's young, and he is willing to read books. You know, he's running a podcast, but he's also a book reader. Gertrude Stein said people like him, meaning James Joyce, because he's incomprehensible and anybody can understand him. Now, Gertrude Stein, that she's accentuating an irony there. Like, how do you suss out what Gertrude's saying, and how would you convince Rob to read The Wake with a group of people?
Oh, this is a conversion therapy.
We can all hold hands, maybe. Do you feel the spirit?
We need to develop a membership.
But I read somewhere, I think Margot Norris is talking about the shift from modernism to postmodernism. And she said, you know, first Joyce was condemned for being unreadable, and then moving to postmodern, he's celebrated for being unreadable, you know, so. It's kind of, I mean, it reminds me of the metaphor of the oyster, you know, the little irritation. He creates the irritation creates the pearl. So you know, there's that kind of continual sense of something that's unresolved, but it does seem to have byproducts that are interesting, you know. And
that's good, Roy. I like that. Duncan, how about you? How could we do that? How could we convert this young man?
Well, first of all, I don't want to convert him.
All right.
Way lies madness.
Everybody comes at their own pace and in their own.
Now this really sounds like a cult.
Yeah, right. Well, you know, I've told Jerry that I'm getting kind of heavily into Mikhail Bakhtin, a Russian literary theorist, I guess, critic. And that's led me to Rabelais, which if you read Rabelais, you begin, at least for me, I began to realize, oh, this dude is Joyce's great-grandfather, whether he realizes or not. And I think he did realize it.
Oh, yeah.
And Rabelais is doing a lot of the same stuff that Joyce is doing, only he's doing it 4 centuries earlier, 5 centuries earlier. And then you look also at Robert Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy. There's a whole history there. Joyce is modernizing this stuff. And you begin to realize that this is an enjoyable way to learn to re-perceive the world and to begin to change, because you're able to make fun of your current perceptions. And you begin to see the shallowness with which we go through life, because we're only trained within a certain educational mode. For example, and I make no pretense, I can't make any pretense to know all this stuff, because my very theory says our condition as human beings is we'll never know it all. And that ironically, one of the worst things that happened to the human mind, the thing which we're most proud about, was the Renaissance, where we were convinced that logic and rationality and was going to be the key to enlightenment. And they're just tools. And if you don't, and the problem is, it led to, I'm going to make a grandiose statement here, it led to slaughter in Europe at the very time when Joyce was writing Ulysses, and then slaughter in Europe and the rise of fascism and insanity in Europe at the time when Joyce was writing Finnegan's Wake. All that shit was based upon science, technology, and logic.
Well, eugenics, right? Eugenics was
You're very scientific. American culture developed much of the theory. If you go and you look at who the prime eugenists were, they were in all the big universities. And of course, kind of the rednecks took it over at a certain point, but it was actually promoted by the big universities. And there were laws passed, all this stuff. So but don't read Joyce, Robert. I don't want you to.
Well,
No.
so he wrote this book. Sorry, Roy, you're going to say something.
No, you go ahead, but after you.
Well, okay. This might sound like an ignorant statement, and I don't intend it to be, but do you think that he wrote this with a clear intent? Like, I want to change the way people think? Or do you think he just wrote this, and if he was alive today, he'd be like, man, why the fuck are they still talking about this?
Both things.
He specifically said, Rob, and we don't know how much to trust the artists when they talk about their art. If you go to the main guy who influenced McLuhan besides Joyce, one of the main guys was starting a movement called New Criticism when he went to school in Cambridge. And the New Criticism guys basically said the last person you want to talk to about their art is the artist. Right. Now, Joyce is very articulate. He says, I want to fool people and keep them studying my book for 30, 40, 50 years or till the end of time. And it will be guaranteed. Finnegan's Wake will probably be studied till the end of time and never be figured out. That's somewhat what is intriguing for us, because it can't be resolved. There's no cliff notes for Finnegan's Wake. It's rated as one of the greatest 100 books in the world ever written, and they can't write the cliff notes. There's still 100 books or 200 books that try to explain it, and they do a pretty good job. But, the intention thing is one thing. And then what he was trying to do was write language about language so that we could figure out what reading does to us, how words change us, and not how much the content of the word is changing us. It's both. It's when McLuhan said the medium is the message, everybody thought he was saying the form is more important than the content. No, he was saying this as a pushing it to an extreme so people would pay attention to the form. But everybody thinks that's what he meant. No, he was a joke. It was like, no, it's like both the form and the content are important, but you never pay attention to the form. So I'm going to tell you to pay attention to the form. So then that's why he was teasing people. And this is why he goes to the poets like T.S. Eliot, and he said, the watchdog of your mind. When you go to rob your neighbor and the guard dog comes out, you just feed the guard dog a steak, a piece
Yeah.
of meat, and the guard dog goes off, and then you can do the crime. That's what we're going for when we read a book. We're going for the meat, the content. We're not realizing what reading a book does to us. Same with the movie, same with the Zoom session, same with every tool. The tool's environment, too much is not seen. You know, if you're a fish, you don't know you're in water until you're taken out of water. So you read Finnegan's Wake, you're taken out of the norm of reading. The norm of reading is you're normally reading a book
Right.
with you and the author, black ink on white pages. That's the experience of reading in general, you know. But Roy, go ahead. You were going to say something.
I'm not sure if I remember. I mean, the idea of form, it just reminded me of Stephen in the library he has this reaction against A.E., the mystic theosophist, who's talking about formless. The art has to get us in contact with formless spiritual essences, and Stephen kind of gets his hackles up, and he talks about his dagger definitions, something, but also something concrete that has form. I suppose something that is informed by the mind rather than the mind being disembodied from the content. Yeah, I'm not sure what the point I'm making, but the I think Flaubert said I could have been a great mystic if it wasn't for my love of form.
Ah, because you can't separate form and content, and you can't separate feeling and thinking. But we can, because we invented the words. So, Duncan bringing up Rabelais was really important, because these are the people who influenced the symbolists, who were the poets, who came out of they came out of Edgar Allan Poe. And Poe invented the detective novel. Let's just put it in quotes. He's one of the pioneers of the detective novel. So the detective novel is, you don't tell your reader everything. You just tell them some of the story, and then they will fill in the missing parts. So it doesn't matter what you say, it's how you make them feel. Oh, I know what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen in this book. And that's why this Robert Anton Wilson explaining Finnegan's Wake on YouTube is brilliant. Faustin Bray taped Robert at a real great moment. He says, Finnegan's Wake is a detective novel. I never heard that called a detective novel before, because he's basically saying it's like the symbolist Mallarmé saying, you don't paint the painting, you paint the effect. It's where all the rock poets came from. Bob Dylan, Jim Morrison, Patti Smith, Kurt Cobain. They're all influenced by the symbolists, because it doesn't matter what they say, basically. It's how it makes you feel. So it's like, how do you lure them in? So, Duncan, I would love to hear you, but Joyce is not subtle. How would you weigh in on Finnegan's Wake being called a detective novel?
Oh, I think it's cute.
But you know what I'm saying? What in the whole thing of
There will forever and a day be the desire to sloganize Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah.
And during my first years, I collected lots of slogans and lots of theories, lots of points of view, and they're fun. I like them. I've got the reference books, and I'm delighted the University of Texas Library is now open to me. I can get almost anything there for free.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm delighted to have that. But like I said, I'm off to, what do I do? You asked me, what did Finnegan's Wake do to me? Well, Finnegan's Wake led me to Rabelais. Rabelais led me to Bakhtin. Bakhtin is leading me to what he calls the polyphonic approach of Dostoevsky, which is he's saying what this is, and I think it's very applicable to Joyce, is that he's trying to show us whole persons. Most literature is flat people. He's a bad guy. She's a vamp. He's just a rat-fink capitalist. And Bakhtin is saying that Dostoevsky is actually trying to present us with people, multi-dimensional people.
Yeah.
And he's not trying to say this person is good, this person is bad. He's not interested in that. He's just interested in bringing in people, and they have all kinds of political philosophies and religious philosophies, et cetera. But Dostoevsky's just kind of putting them out. And according to Bakhtin, this was a revolution in literature. Nothing has ever happened like it before. So that's one thing that it's done, and now I'm going back and I'm looking at Joyce in the same way. And like yesterday, when we were reading with the Sweeney's group, and I told you, I thought the reading was marvelous. And there was a lot of good reading, and that there was things really going on in there that was using the sounds of the words and the rhythm of the words, and it was transformative.
Yeah.
And Jerry, I need to come back. I don't remember Joyce ever recommending that people read it out loud in a group.
Yeah.
Well, he did say he was asked for some of the levels of meaning, and he said, "Don't worry about the levels of meaning. It's meant to be pleasing to the ear." So,
right.
So in that sense, he was. But the interesting the Bakhtin and Rabelais connection with Joyce is I think is very interesting, and I think that it was a revolution for Joyce when instead of trying to express himself like a hero or romantic turn of the century character, he started kind of taking over languages and reforming them. It's like almost standing at a as he said, behind the creation, like paring his fingernails, where he's not. And he's making different forms of language collide with each other.
Yeah.
And he had his father.
Oh yeah, he must have been something.
His father was how I'm not quite sure. Maybe you can tell me, Roy. At what point did Joyce really become conscious that his father was a convincing fraud?
Well, yeah, I think that foul-mouthed narrator of Cyclops, the barfly, who's full of rancor and saying horrible things about everybody. He said it was actually based on his father.
Based on his father.
Yeah, that he took a lot of those expressions from his father, and he thought his father was hilarious, and he said he's the silliest man I ever knew. I could never quite figure that out because the way he's presented, at least in portrait, he doesn't seem silly, or when he appears in Ulysses, he doesn't appear. Simon doesn't appear silly.
Right,
But,
and this speaks exactly to my point. And why I say his father was an extremely important influence, because his father, this is strictly a theory,
Mhm.
not betting any money on it. Uh-oh. Robert, are you?
The aliens invading?
Yeah.
Roswell. Uh-oh. Okay.
Okay, Duncan, continue on. So this is interesting. Yeah, this is your
Well, James Joyce watched his father, and I mean, unless we have a really abusive father, we all tend to revere our fathers up to a certain age. And John Joyce was a good bullshitter. He was a good theatrical man who knew how to, present himself as a government official, or as a singer, or as a glad hand, or whatever, and as a successful businessman.
Mhm.
At a certain point, Joyce realized, oh my God, something's
Yeah.
not right here.
Well, he did drink, yeah.
And I think that was an early clue to James Joyce to always look behind the curtain,
Mhm.
whether it's a government official or a priest or a literary
Mhm.
light of the day or whatever. Always look behind the curtain. Try to figure out you're never going to figure out everything that's going on.
Mhm.
But at least you can kind of begin to see, oh, there's no perfection here.
Mhm.
These are human beings stumbling through life with various levels of competence at various times and in various phases. And I think that Finnegan's Wake and Ulysses was when he really got into trying to lead other people behind the curtain of language, rhetoric styles, logic, the church, the government, the teachers, the other literary people, etc., and made deliberate fun of himself.
Yeah, he didn't accept himself from the fraudulent. I mean, he talks about the enormous forged check. That's what he compares his literary output to, that imposed on the public. That's going to bounce, I guess. And of course, Shem is a plagiarist. He's he included that fraudulent aspect to his own supposed greatness, which
That was well put, both of you guys, because this is what McLuhan sort of thought Wizard of Us, the Wizard of Oz to the Wizard of Us. And it's like the atomic dog pulls the curtain away and reveals what's behind the curtain. So that's his main influence, was how can we uncover the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. And so this is what Emperor is wearing no clothes. Also, go ahead, Duncan.
Well, but I want to bring up a point that Bachton makes, and he makes it extremely well. And I think Joyce actually falls into the old style of carnivalesque.
Mhm.
Bachton says that when the carnivalesque, making fun of everything and all that, when it was a cultural group thing, it was extremely healthy and actually was the source of real creativity and movement forward of a culture. And when it became adopted by the professional writers,
Yeah.
it turned into a very crude um, sarcasm
Yeah.
that did not have a fructifying effect because it was mean-spirited.
Yeah.
And for all of Joyce's poking fun at everybody, at least at this point, I believe he was also very appreciative of all types, no matter how fallen we are as human beings, no matter what buffoons we are at times, that as a group, this was the evolving, potent, fertile productivity of human beings.
Yeah, it's sort of, Rob, this is good because it brings up our topic next week is comedy. In all, every comic wants to drop Lenny Bruce as their influence. Jerry Seinfeld, everybody's wants to drop it. Now they don't realize that what Lenny Bruce sort of did is similar to Joyce in that he didn't open up the floodgates so you could use the F word. That's what they think, that you can just be mean spirited and be, Sam Kinison. Not to diss Sam Kinison, but that sort of aggressive, it's just a huge amount of comedy that went sort of the bad route of Lenny Bruce.
Right.
When they didn't realize what Lenny got from Lord Buckley was that's joke telling can be storytelling.
It's like the expression, you catch more bees with honey than you do with vinegar, right? But even in comedy, right? If you tell a joke, but it's satirical in nature and people laugh, or if you make fun of yourself, but then people are like, oh, wait a minute, I do that too. Versus, you stupid people, why are you so dumb that you do this? But you say, man, the other day I crossed the street and I got hit by a bus, or something like horrible example, but
yeah, and the Duncan's digging deep into Menippean satire, and that's the important subject that Joyce got from Rabelais. He got it from Lewis Carroll, and he got it from many sources, including the Symbolists. But since both of you, Roy and Duncan, are rooted in some sense of knowing where Joyce came from, because it wasn't like he just started writing gobbledygook. He had a history of knowing how to write poetry, how to write books that were readable. And, there's this through line. And it was in A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man in 1916. He wrote this. And I'd love to get both your takes on the essence of this. It's usually condensed a little, but for our sake, I can put it in a little more context. Joyce wrote, "Oh, welcome, O life. I go to encounter for the millionth time the reality of experience, and to forge in the smithy of my soul the uncreated conscious of my race. Old father, old artificer, stand me now and ever in good stead." What the heck was he saying there, Roy?
Well, I had studied the relationship between Joyce and Charles Sanders Peirce. I don't know if you know much about him. He had a theory of called firstness, secondness, and thirdness. And firstness is like what we are, almost like this instinctual, thinking of ourselves as the only, pure id, without a second. We are the universe, narcissistic and solipsistic. But then the encounter with actual reality, with the resistant stuff of reality, that creates the revolution. And certainly, Stephen does have that tendency towards just thinking of himself as the only, one big ego, the only thing in the universe. But I think the writings show him encountering and knocking against reality. I mean, he talks about Aristotle knocking his head against bodies, that's how I see that.
And what's the third, though? I missed that.
Then the thirdness is reconciling the first and the second into a greater unity. You know,
Mhm.
So you're saying, what is the smithy of my soul in the uncreated conscious of my race? What's the bottom line? What is he saying in lay person's terms there?
I mean, I mean, I think he felt a certain shame at Irish history, or how Ireland had been degraded and brainwashed and subjugated, and I feel like he really wanted to liberate. And there were so many turncoats in Ireland, so many betrayers. You said you always, the English can always find a betrayer to overcome any kind of revolt. They're waiting there, but I mean, I think he thought of Parnell as really trying to create the conscience of the Irish.
And Parnell's action was what? So people will understand that.
Well, Parnell was a magician almost. I mean, he to unite Ireland in getting home rule, you had to unite the extreme left, the Fenians, the terrorists, the IRA, the Brotherhood. You had to unite them with the Catholic Church on the right, and Parnell was able to do this balancing act where he actually, for a time, he was in control of the Parliament. But of course he had that. He's a tragic figure. He's a perfect tragic figure. He had that flaw that destroyed him.
Right. So thank you. That was good. Now, Duncan, to forge in the smithy of my soul, the uncreated conscience of my race. Any comments? How's that? How do those words make you feel? And what the heck?
We could talk about that one little bit for probably 20 or 30 hours just by itself. And I think Joyce, later in life, Joyce was both amused and amazed that he wrote that.
Yeah.
He was amused that he was so freaking arrogant as a young man. But he was amazed that he was able to write something that was actually kind of predictive in a way. It's grandiose young man stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, you look around, you see your elders, you see your contemporaries, you see your history. It's all hopelessly lost. They're all wandering in the dark. And, for whatever reason, you see things in a light, but the light's still a little dark. But, you know that you want to write things, and you know that you want your writing to redeem. He's well steeped in Aquinas and in Catholic theology, and so he's both an unbeliever and a believer at the same time. And he knew the effects of writers on him. I think one of the conceits, and Roy probably knows a lot more about this than I did, a real important part of Joyce to me is he used to go to this old, musty, freaking library that nobody or very few people went to in Dublin, and spend hours and hours pulling off these medieval and Renaissance texts and sitting down and reading them. He knew he was among the very few people that ever went in the library, much less read to the extent he did. And he knew what effect these things were having on him. It's probably ironic. I have no proof of this, but it's ironic that probably Thomas Aquinas freed Joyce from the church, from the clutches of the church.
Wow. And it's amazing, Duncan. What you're saying is Joyce logged in the hours. He did the research to write the gobbledygook that makes us realize what reading does to us. So
he was always on the job.
yeah. It's like
Well,
they
and
ask
then,
for,
and then if I can wax just a little bit further,
please go ahead.
What?
very important thing was he was studying Italian, one of the very few students of Italian when he was at university. And, he was reading Dante, and he was realizing that Dante created new language,
Yeah.
a new grammar, created a whole cosmos. So that studying Italian led him to Dante, led him to, and probably Dante in the original, and he was probably reading the books, the analytical books from hundreds of years before. So we got Dante, Vico, and Bruno.
Yeah.
And then he goes off and becomes an English teacher. And as the next English teacher, I can tell you that's a marvelous way to learn about your language.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Particularly if you haven't been trained to be an English teacher.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing what you said, both all of you. And so, what I wanted to go into now was another phenomenon that I think, again, Robert Anton Wilson says that, or someone said that Finnegan's Wake is a cure for insomnia. So it's funny because, I know Tom Robbins, the great, what's his famous book?
Another roadside attraction.
Yeah, another
With
roadside
Howard
attraction.
and
He's a total McLuhan Finnegan's Wake freak, and he has a copy of Finnegan's Wake next to his bed, and he reads 2 or 3 lines every night before he goes to bed. He's also a Grateful Dead druggie guy, kind of guy too. So he's he made his mark in the world with some really important books. Women love to fall in love with him, and
Mm.
so this is like a cure for insomnia, and there's the proof, and it's this redeeming word that you just brought up, Duncan. And then you go to this hidden ground in Finnegan's Wake. His name is Wyndham Lewis. So the Grace and the what's the aunt and the Grace Hopper?
Grace Hopper.
Grace Hopper. Yeah.
The Grace Hopper is the ant and the grasshopper. The Aesop's fable is put into Finnegan's Wake with Joyce and Wyndham Lewis. So he's playing with one of his contemporaries. And Wyndham Lewis has this line that artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future. Now, I love to spew that line out all the time, and people go, what the heck? Now, I think what we're doing is typifying that right now. We're in a Zoom session and we're living in the present. This is being broadcast to millions of people live, but it will go into a.
I would hope tens of millions.
I think it's 1 or 2, but individuals.
Who's gonna quibble?
It always says viewing one. But anyways, the beauty of this, and thank you again, Rob Grant, is that it's being taped and can be referenced anytime. And so it's both a live
Smithsonian. Yeah.
Yeah, it's both a live experience and it's being taped. And this thing is that we're living in the present, writing a detailed history. How can you write a detailed history? You can, of the future. So this is embracing a maxim that both Joyce and Zappa said, all times are happening now. And it's a real phenomenon. And what I wanted to discuss and hear from you, smart gentlemen, about what is time in the wake. And I'm going to set it up from this book, Novelist on the Novel. And it's simply a couple lines that says Virginia Woolf and James Joyce, in order to throw into relief these moments of heightened consciousness, these epiphanies, which seem to take place in a dimension outside the time registered by the clock on the wall. But these modern methods, stream of consciousness writing, only give further emphasis to the fact that the sense of individuality depends on memory, and that memory in turn depends on time. They remind us that moments of heightened awareness derive from all the moments of the past, that what we depend on is what we have been, and that in the art of the novel, the sense of infinity is communicated most poignantly when we are aware of the steady ticking away of time by the clock. So it's this sort of irony of the wall on the clock on the wall is what we think time is. But is time all times happening now? If I meet someone at a party and they go, "What's Finnegan's Wake about?" I says, "It's about everything that's ever happened or ever will happen." They're like, "No way." Now it is a good way to explain the way. But how do you, we'll start with you, Duncan. How do you tackle this phenomenon of time? What is time, and how Joyce navigated it in the wake?
What is time? Time is a conceptual thing that morphs with every different environment. Let me use the old cliche. What was it? Roy probably remembers this better than I do. Maybe Rob does too. What's the thing about if you want to know what time is, put your hand on a hot flame.
Oh.
And then tell how much time your hand was there. I mean, we all have this experience of time elongating, morphing, and disappearing. We all have the experience where suddenly, at the age of, I'll pick a nice middling age, at the age of 50, we finally realize that something happened in the past was totally different than what we've gone thinking. One of my examples was I briefly had a lover back in the 60s. And I don't know why, but I got the idea in my head that, she had breast cancer, which I think she did. And then somehow she died. And so it was probably like 72. And then in probably about 2002, a friend's ex-wife had died, and I was invited to the funeral, and I went to the funeral to support my friend. And I went there, and my dead lover was there.
Uh-huh.
Did that change my past?
That
Did it give me a concept of time and memory? You bet.
Yeah.
Make me a little bit more humble in my understanding of these things? Big time. I don't know if that totally answered your question.
No, that was beautiful. I love the anecdotal answers, but Duncan, it's all times are happening now, and in you incorporated the other word that this author put in there is memory, and it's like how much is conjuring up your memory. The word that McLuhan called it was rear view mirrorism, that we move forward looking in a rear view mirror, and there's that little fine line print on the rear view mirrors. Objects may appear close.
Bigger than larger than they appear.
No, that was good. That was good, Duncan. Roy, go ahead.
Well, actually, remind me, this famous St. Augustine, he said, I know what time is, but when you ask me what time is, I don't know what it is. So it's a hard question to answer. But you mentioned Wyndham Lewis, and I think that's a good, interesting thing about, he wrote a book called Time and Western Man, which has a chapter on Joyce, which actually is quite brutal. He says things like, there's not very much reflection going on inside of the mind of James Joyce. And he thought that the new writers like Virginia Woolf and Gertrude Stein and Joyce and the philosopher Bergson had created what he called a time philosophy, which is Heraclitean, kind of a philosophy of flux, which he hated. He believed in kind of a static universe where you can. He was an eye man and a space man, where you can see everything laid out in front of you simultaneously, rather than one thing coming after the other, where you can never see everything at the same time. So, yeah, I mean, he hated the idea of the whole stream of consciousness. He thought this was really against kind of a way of destroying Western values, I think. But when you talk about the clock, I think that's a perfect example of what Bergson called a spatialization of time. You see time as something that's laid out spatially all at once, but that's not how you experience time at all. Time is one thing after the other, where you're kind of, you go into these blind alleys and you're not sure where you are, and it speeds up and it slows down, and God knows what, depending on your psychic state.
Yeah.
It is interesting how Joyce tackles this in his over 600 pages in the Wake. But Rob, were you going to add something or ask or tell us?
I was going to say, like, when you remember things, it almost seems like memory is kind of like a dreamscape sort of thing. It's like, when did that happen? Like, you remember events happening, but, well, for me, I remember events happening, but I don't remember them reflective to any time period. Like the before, the things that, if I'm trying to carbon date it, let's say, I'm like, okay, that happened. And then, but oftentimes the order of things is totally off in our recollection, just like in a dream. So I wonder if almost the act of remembering or whatever is related to the act of the dreamscape. And I know that Finnegan's Wake is very much like a novel that's like a dreamscape.
It's a night book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's actually good comment, Robert, because Joy, let's see, I think it was Beckett, he says, Finnegan's Wake is not about a dream, it is a dream. So that's why, people would equate it to tripping on acid, because if you read it out loud with a group of people and you get lost in what's happening, it is very much like expanding your consciousness. And go ahead, Rob.
Well, I was going to say there's a really big difference between reading an excerpt from a book and just reading a book, right? Like, I'm going to read for 2 hours. Well, there's a big difference between reading a book, any book, in my opinion, for 2 hours and reading, like, I'm going to read this one section of the book. Like, you really do get, again, lost in it. I don't know. Sorry.
Go ahead,
Duncan.
Duncan.
Well, Jerry knows. I've told Jerry many times. I read chunks. I rarely read. I mean, when I'm in a Sweeney's or like our Ulysses group, that's generally the most I ever read these days. I never start a book and just go bzz, because I realize you talk about memory. I started going, oh, what was that book about anyway?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I just have these, if I have any real memory, it's just some kind of impressionistic stuff and maybe one or two dramatic scenes. And I began to realize that for me, maybe it's my stage of life, I don't know. But for me, it's actually better to read a section. And I don't mean the section, I mean, I'm not reading the author's section. Unless it's a book like, Rabelais that has very short chapters. And then when I listen to Rabelais, like 3 minute, 4-minute chapters, and I'll stop. I'll stop there and dwell on it. Now I may go off to something else. I may study a little Japanese, for example, do some pronunciation work in Japanese, and then I may, look at something that Jerry sent me, and I'm fine as long as there's a distinction. But this idea of just sitting down and reading the book through no longer works for me.
So yeah, good point. And when you read a chunk, it's like you can retain that, but if you just read, you get lost in it, right?
Yeah,
Or at least
it's really the old, Zen tea master story, to where a person wants to become enlightenment, and wants to do this, and the tea master's sitting there, and he's pouring the tea into the cup, and he doesn't stop when the cup is full. The cup is going over and over and over,
yes,
and going out on the table, and the student who came said, "The tea's going everywhere." And the Zen master says, "Yes, and that's what's happened in your mind. You're not absorbing anything. You're so busy pouring more tea into your head that it's not having any effect. So go do something else."
And a dream's kind of similar. I mean, how much do we really retain of our dreams?
I never try to retain my dreams.
I probably shouldn't either.
No, dreams are meant to be dreamt, but it's okay to retain them and talk about them.
Yeah, it's okay.
Roy, that was good. Roy, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. I have a hard time getting to that long flow. My wife is completely different. She can gallop through these books, and it's like, for her, it's like a movie. But I can't do that because I'm too ponderous, I guess. But I think there's a big difference between reading and rereading. And then you reread something, and then you find something that, or you create contexts for what you're reading. And I think Joyce, there's so many different contexts that can put one moment in perspective. Yeah, in a way, I feel like I'm trying to. There was that old Saturday Night Live routine where they said, they're taking a course that teaches you how to read more slowly. I found Mark Twain's actually funny. When I started reading slowly. But I'm getting kind of slower and slower, and where I want to find a place to stop and take it in.
Yeah,
I do
at
a
least
lot of napping after I read.
Was that?
I do a lot of napping after I read.
Yeah. Well,
I'll read something. Now, I do have to make a correction. If I'm only reading for the sound and the flow and have no ambition to remember what I read, I literally just want the sensation, I will do that. Okay, but if I'm reading because I want to retain the images and the argument, etc., I don't read multiple things.
So here's my next question, if I may. Is Finnegan's Wake meant to be read in chunks, like you described, or is it meant to be read in that long state?
I can answer that.
Jerry's got an answer.
For 25 years, I ran a Finnegan's Wake reading club. I still run it. We read, for most of the 20 years, we read 2 pages per meeting once a month. And then we'd talk about those 2 pages. Once Peter started his Austin Finnegan's Wake group 8 years ago, and I started attending that a year ago on Zoom, he reads 1 page per meeting. Then, in the midst of that, a half a year ago, and that all worked fine, I started going to Sweeney's Pharmacy's reading club, and they read 6 to 8 pages and then talk about it for
Wow.
about a half hour. I said, I've done it wrong for 25 years. It's better to read it, in my opinion, in chunks of 8 pages over an hour than to do 1 or 2 pages per 2-hour reading. Now, it's not that I'm going to change. Duncan and I have talked about this. I'm not going to change Finnegan's Wake's form, and Peter is not changing the Austin Wake book readings form. But we have that way with the Sweeney's group, and it's way better. So it was a great question, Rob. And, that's, we were talking about questions, and Duncan brought up the Zen master. I went up to my Zen master and I says, what's the best question I can ask you? And he goes, the question you just asked me. Now, I agree with Roy about long form, reading slow. Reading slow is a real treat, but if you're raised in front of a TV like I was, I didn't grow up reading. I got straight A's in school because my dad helped me do all my homework. So it appears that I'm smart. I even got straight A's in college. It appears I'm smart, but I've only read like 3 books in my life. I'll read you the titles. Mad Magazine, snappy answers to stupid questions. Catcher in the Rye, and Confederacy of Dunces. So then when I tell people I run a reading club, they go, what books are you reading? I goes, well, we only read 1 book. It's Finnegan's Wake. It's like, it makes sense because it's an unreadable book. But let's dive into this dream thing for a second, because we can close out pretty soon here. In Dream Away, like Joyce said in Finnegan's Wake, he said, afloat in a dream lifeboat. So McLuhan really sort of concluded that reading Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people is like dreaming awake. Like everyone has the ability to create scenarios in the middle of the night when they're sleeping. These unbelievable scenarios. We have these amazing creative powers. Pretty much everybody dreams, let's say. Not everybody can recall them. But McLuhan concluded that artists, and not to be elitist, but artists, social engineers like Joyce, dream while they're awake. So it's called dreaming awake. So it really goes to one of America's great authors, Jack Kerouac, who wrote On the Road. He said, life is a dream already over. So I think that resonates with his love for Finnegan's Wake, in that it's not the description of a dream, it is a dream. So if you could just fit in any comments on dreams and the wake in sort of conclusion. Roy, you're up, and then Duncan, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I just reminded me of what you said. I think the Grateful Dead said the same thing. That this is just a dream we dreamed one afternoon long ago. The dream's already over, and this is kind of the after effects of it. Borges has a great thing on that also, that the dream. But yeah. I mean, I know I have heard. There's always that controversy. Is this HCE's dream? Who's dreaming? Is it the reader's dream? Is it Joyce's dream? And but I think there was also an element that was more conscious than a dream, because he said things like, I can justify every line, and he said people are talking about the unconscious. What do they know about the conscious? I'm interested in the conscious, which is not the dream state, actually. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe they're connected. If you can dream consciously, that would be maybe the ideal. But the thing you're saying about it's the cure for insomnia.
Cheer for
yeah, because I know that there's a passage in the Wake where he says, he's looking. It's addressed to the ideal reader suffering from the ideal insomnia, which means his ideal reader is never sleeps really. It's just in a continual state of wakefulness, trying to put these clues together. But on the other hand, you know what Nabokov said about the Wake?
Tell me.
He hated it. He said, the snoring you hear is from the next room. That's all I had to say about the Wake.
Well, that's the beauty. If the art if everybody loves a piece of art or everybody hates it, it's probably not great. If some people love it and some people hate it, you're probably
Well, he was always controversial, that's for sure.
But Duncan, for the final benediction, Father Duncan, is there any comments on the Wake and the dream state? Oh, you're on mute.
Hey, you're mute.
Perfect.
Perfect. Yes, that's it. You're a sign language person.
I dream a lot. And I think I dream, or at least I see parts of the dream more since I've been reading Finnegan's Wake. But I don't really try to capture them. I mean, I've told Jerry a couple of dreams that I've had that were strong enough that I felt like, oh, these dreams, for whatever reason, want to be remembered. And they want me to tell somebody about it. But most of them, it's kind of like my heart beating and my lungs breathing and my blood circulating. I think most dreams are of that nature. You don't really want to interfere with them. You just want them to go. They're doing some kind of work. I don't know what it is. And it's not my job to know. At least that's how I feel right now. I could change tomorrow morning, wake up and say, God, I got to remember that dream. But I think Joyce, as I said before, is giving us the tools to free ourselves and loosen our cages. And, he did a lot of that in Ulysses. But he also got a little shift from Ulysses, and it was very hard work to publish. And I think he just decided that, you know what? I'm just going to write. I'm going to go a step further. I'm going to go a galaxy beyond. And that's what he was doing. And I think he was trying in 624 pages, something like that. He's trying to do for us, it's kind of like the James Joyce PhD program for cosmic awareness. And he's given us the tools, and he's given us songs, and he's given us all this stuff. But Robert, don't get involved. You got young children.
Yeah.
They need your attention.
That was a good warning, Duncan, because that is like we don't want to turn you into this collator. What Roy was talking about was lucid dreaming. That we can dream while we're awake, and the American Indian, indigenous people, when you have your dream, your neighbor comes into your tent and asks you about your dream. And the questions they ask them helps create your dream memory. So they're the co-creator. So that's what Joyce said. My consumers are my producers.
Mhm.
So when you read Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people, you're the living organism creating the book.
Am I non-lucid dreaming right now?
Yes, we are. And it's like Duncan said, the word tools is so good. But let's just go full circle and end it up with this, Rob. We started with 6 words from Finnegan's Wake, and we asked these experts what they think. I'm not asking you what you think they mean. It's how do these 6 words make you feel, Rob? First we feel, then we fall.
How does it make me feel?
Yeah.
I think about skydiving.
That's good.
Right. And I remember when I went actually, you mind if I tell an anecdotal story?
Yeah, tell it.
So I went skydiving one time, which is about the dumbest fucking thing I've ever done in my life. And I'm definitely afraid of heights. Definitely afraid of heights. And I was like, I'm going to conquer my fear of heights. And so my partner and I and a friend, we go skydiving. We drive to the place. The whole time I'm in absolute denial that I'm about to fall out of an airplane. And then we put the jumpsuits on, you know, getting all strapped on. Still in my mind, I'm like, you know, this isn't real, right? I'm underneath the airplane, you know, ducking under. I am, you know, whatever. Get up there. The guy's like strapping himself to me. You know, oh, okay, all right. And then they open up like the bay doors and you can see forever. And I'm like, holy Christ, I'm high up, right? Like, and the guy, and then as we're going up, this is actually a funny joke. He asked me, what do I do for a living? And I said, oh, I'm a teacher and I, you know, speak to kids. He said, oh, public speaking, that scares me to death. I was like, good joke. Anyways, so then we get out there and then we fall out of the airplane. I'm the first person out. And I'll never forget how hard I resisted falling out of that airplane as if I could, right? And then as I'm falling, we're doing like hundreds of cartwheels. And the guy's like, you got to put your arms up. Anyway, we land. I'm fine. I live. Afterwards, I couldn't sleep that night after having, you know, I got to terra firma. And I'm like, this is great. I couldn't sleep that night because I realized, what the hell did I do? The night before, I slept just fine. Anyways, it's just something about the mind that first we feel, then we fall.
It's an amazing.
I don't know. I attribute that entire, like that connects perfectly to that experience.
Yeah. Well, that's users content. That's a beautiful way to end. I'm going to end us with this. Thank you all, Duncan, Roy, and Robert. This was an amazing time. And this is a gentleman. This is a gentleman in America who wrote books. Pretty smart, great writer. His name's Mark Twain. He ended up in Finnegan's Wake a few times. But here's what he says. A classic is something that everybody wants to have read and nobody wants to read. Now that couldn't better explain the Wake.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you all. I really appreciate this. Let's do it again.
This was a lot of fun. Take care. Have a great night. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll see you tomorrow night, Ulysses.
Yes.